Well, good evening, everybody. I'm looking at my phone here real quick to see what day it is because I've lost track of them. But anyway, welcome. It's Monday, February 20th. And if you're watching this live, we're sure happy to have you here with us. And if you're watching it on a recording, we're still happy that you're with us. We just wish you were here live so that we could see your pretty face.
Yep.
Anywho.
Hey, we are going to be sharing this recording on our site. So if you don't want your face on there, by all means, put your video off so that way people don't see you. Otherwise, let it be known we are going to broadcast you to the world.
Well, I'd say don't be a prude. Just put your face up there. It's all good.
Hey, we're really excited tonight. We're going to be talking about the secrets of sex and marriage.
I need to learn some secrets about sex.
No. It's the surprises that make all the difference. Yeah, you're still going to run with it, aren't you?
Yeah. I think I should.
So I want to read a couple of fun, surprising facts. And of course, I can't take credit for this. Our dear friends, Jeff and Shauti, gave us these statistics, but it kind of surprised me. So spouses who can learn to talk about sex have a lot more sex. Get this, 74% of couples with great communication had sex once a week or more, compared to just 22% of those with poor communication.
So is there a statistic beyond that where you
know.
can be having sex like 2-3 times a week?
I don't know. I have to ask Jeff and Shauti about that one.
I think we should.
Hey, here's another one. 79% of couples reported not being on the same page about how often they want sex. So if you feel like, wow, I'm just in the minority, I don't know why I can't get on the same page, why we always have arguments around that, you're going to love our guests tonight. They're going to shed some lights on some of the surprises and the statistics, because research statisticians amongst us. That means they're really smart people. We could go on about how they graduated from Harvard, how they did all these different things, but they said, please don't do a long bio. So they're like us. They're normal people with a passion and a heart to help marriages. And so we want to introduce our good friends, Jeff and Shauti Feldhahn, to the call. Guys, you are up. Please say hello to everybody, and then we're going to get this party started.
Greg, Julie, and everyone. We are grateful to be with y'all. And it's always a pleasure. We love these guys.
We do. We like hanging out with these guys.
We like hanging out with y'all too. It's been a lot of fun.
Funny story. I remember when I wrote my first book, and I think I've told you this, Shauti, my agent was asked me to write about what I wish my mother had told me about men. And I'm like, no, I am the last person in the world to be writing a book like that. That's for smart people like Shauti Feldhahn.
I heard her say it. She speaketh the truth.
And so when I grow up, I want to be like you. But since I can't, I thought the next best thing would be to have you on our broadcast so that you can.
Hilarious. Oh my gosh, I think I'd forgotten that. I'd blocked it out.
Hey, I'd love to hear kind of, we're going to ask some specific questions and things about maybe some of the surprising things that you found, even as you were doing research. But talk to us a little bit about what compelled you to write it.
And then I have a follow-up.
And then you have a follow-up. So
yeah.
Just what compelled you to write it? Talk to us about that.
Honestly, it was, we had just finished our last research project, which was helping couples understand why they get, kind of sideways around money. What is it that goes on inside of our hearts and minds when it comes to money that causes this opportunity for division in our marriage or in our relationships?
And how can we have connection?
Yeah, how can we have connection? For us, we'd kind of, in that particular area, we were relationship authors now by this time, maybe 15 years or so. And we weren't on the same page.
We couldn't talk about it.
We couldn't talk about it. So we didn't fight about it, but it was always kind of awkward. And so that was kind of how we handled that one. And shortly after that book came out, we were kind of thinking, what are we going to do now? And then kind of Shaunti's like, well, what's the other big topic and the other one that we're awkward about?
And what's the other big topic for most marriages? And we looked at each other, we're like, oh, dang.
No,
Yeah.
right?
Like, really? Am I really considering doing a research study on this and writing a book and talking about sex? Like, we couldn't even say the word from the stage. Like,
No,
if we would be talking about it, would be like, and then, people who, when you have sex, you
I mean, honestly, I grew up in the Midwest, and the only time sex was discussed was when I was in high school. And let me just tell you, you don't get your best information from 14-year-old boys. And that's really where it all in my life, it was just one of those things you kind of thought, well, maybe it's just you innately know how to understand all of these things. Wasn't the case.
I think that's a very valid point, my man. About, the 14-year-olds educating us in grade school, actually, I guess middle school, high school, whatever. Bro science around sex is probably not,
Not the best.
source. It's generally not the best source of much of anything.
Anything, for sure.
Well, let me ask you this. I have been fascinated over the years, really, to learn about your process of book writing and a very unique and specialized approach, really. So I would love it if, and I think other people would find it very interesting and would even validate the book and the work that you all have done, not only in this project, but others, even more so. Tell me about, what is the process like? What do y'all do? And what did you do as you approached writing this?
Because you
little
don't just
jewel?
say, let's write a book about sex and then start putting that's how we would write it. But let's talk about what you do to quantify what your findings.
Yeah.
Why don't you give the story kind of how we did the earlier research projects?
Well, or this one. I mean,
well,
it's the
this
same.
is a little different in the how we start out, how we approach it.
Well, the thing that's interesting about this, the research process, it's all designed around the same goal, which is we're really just trying to dig out the little things that make a big difference.
That might be surprising to all of us. And each of the projects usually take about 3 years from kind of, the first
start of the
germ of an
investigation.
idea, and
Yeah.
then to the culmination of when a book comes out.
And we have to say to you guys actually helped us with this research project. And some of the people on this call may have even taken part in some of our pilot surveys. And if that's you, thank you. Because the way that we do it is, and just the short version, because I could go on forever about a research project, and you really don't want me to go on to nerd out on the research stuff. But for those people who care about this kind of thing, the way that we generally do it is we spend quite a bit of time, usually almost a year, doing a lot of qualitative research, like interviews, depending on the topic, interviews of, random people. If I'm stuck behind somebody in the grocery aisle and it's taking forever, I might just ask some random questions about money or parenting or, whatever it is that we're studying at the moment. And it's really helpful because, people, they generally want to help. And they're totally anonymous. I don't know who they are. They can be completely honest. Now, on this topic, we couldn't do that.
Not grocery store line subject.
Yeah,
right?
we would have needed a budget line item for bail money. But the qualitative research for this one, of just getting input from average couples, the way that we did this, it was kind of fun.
It was great.
I don't know if you want to tell them how
we did anonymous Zoom interviews. So what would happen is the couple on the other side of the screen would have their camera turned off, and our camera would be on, so they could see us and engage with us. We couldn't see them, and they didn't give us their names. They would choose a pseudonym while we're on the screen. So we had
Farm Boy and Buttercup,
or Han and Leia,
Wanda and Vision.
So those were some of
there's
our
endless possibilities.
That's hilarious.
So it was great. And
so we
it
didn't
was,
know who they were. They could be completely honest.
and honestly, at the very beginning, we don't even know what we're looking for. We're just talking with them. And all of a sudden,
hearing their stories.
you
and-
start to surface certain patterns between one couple and another, one frustration. Oh, they talked about that also. And all of those things, after months and months and months, begin to make sense.
And then what we do is basically say, I think we've heard, this one thing 137 times. I think that this surprising thing might matter. Like this might be true. And we identify several of those. And then we test it on the survey. And we start off by doing what's called pilot surveys with people like you guys and your followers to be able to test the survey questions, because we don't want to do the big because we end up with nationally representative surveys, and you don't want to pay $50,000 for a giant national survey and discover that people didn't understand your questions.
Right.
And so that's why we did the pilot surveys and got great input. Like the people who did the pilot surveys, your followers, for example, they contributed so much good feedback in the comments and telling stories, and it was all anonymous.
Right.
It was really helpful. And then it finishes with the big nationally representative survey that we use in the book.
Now, one little bit of nerdishness here, because questions matter. How you ask a question matters. And there are surveys out there where I read them and I go, that result is terrible because the question was terrible.
It was terrible.
So how can you trust it? But anyways, so we've always, in every one of our surveys, every one of our questions have been vetted through an expert, one that is a believer, who was the former head of survey design for the U.S. Census Bureau.
Wow.
And he felt called to work with us and has over the years. And this particular one, he didn't work with us because
we had actually already, for this topic, and this is for everybody to know as you listen for the rest of our conversation here, it's not just our project. This was the first time that we partnered with an expert, because on this topic of sex and intimacy, I mean, if there was something that was inaccurate just because we didn't understand the nuances clinically,
right,
like we could do damage on this topic. And so we enlisted Dr. Michael Seitzma, who is one of the top sort of most renowned experts in the field of sex therapy in the Christian community. Like if you ask for the names of the top 2 or 3 people who have influenced everybody else, he would be one of the top 2 or 3.
Absolutely.
That's who we wrote the book with. So, and did all the research with.
Well, I just love the care that you all take in your approach to book writing, and being a statistician and really diving deep into the numbers and understanding the science, really how to dig into the science. And I'm a huge kind of science guy too. So I like to know, I'm with you, Jeff, like some of the wording of the questions and such. It's like, that's going to produce a false result. That doesn't mean anything. It's not a good question. And so I just appreciate your all's approach. So I appreciate you kind of talking a little bit about that. Let's dive into some of the actual things that they learned.
Yeah, I would love to know, maybe as you were doing the research, surely there were some things that were either shocking or surprising to you. So of all the surprises that popped up, what was maybe the most surprising or the most important that you think that our audience would need to know?
Okay, I can definitely jump into probably one of the ones that is the most impactful. Let's just put it that way, okay? Because you know how we were talking about 14-year-old boys, the myths in our head,
our sources of information,
information around this topic, because this is a topic that, unlike almost anything else, this is a topic in our marriage. We don't even talk, none of us talk about it with even our closest friends, really.
Right.
And I mean, that's
We'll talk in generalities, like not a lot of action happening over here at this Feldhahn household. That's maybe as deep as it goes.
but we don't, because it's a sacred private topic, we don't compare notes with other people. And so the only source of information about how things work and what are the ways that the processes by which such and such happens, or fixing heartaches or whatever, the only thing that we know is what we see like on TV or in a movie or what we read in a book. And I realized, when you ask what's sort of the most surprising and most impactful, is I realized that we're actually basing that a lot of the heartache on this topic it actually derives from us believing quite a bit of mythology around this without realizing it from the movies or whatever. And
Right.
we know that we know that like stories you see on screen, like it puts people in, not real life situations, but we think that what's portrayed about the process behind getting to sex, that is just the way it works, that there's one way it works. And that idea is that the guy and the girl look at each other and there's some sort of spark, some sort of sense of desire, and there's this surge of desire, and pretty soon they start kissing and the clothes are off and they're in bed, right?
They're both
they're both feeling that surge of desire, and we sort of think that's just the way sex works. And so if it doesn't work that way in our relationship, we kind of feel like something's broken, like something's wrong,
or someone
or someone
is broken or deficient. And the interesting thing about that is that that tends to be, that view of sex and how it happens tends to be a very kind of male-centric,
male-oriented view, it turns out. And the reason that we know this now is because once we did all of the surveys and everything else, what we found is that that is one type of desire, and you could call it like initiating desire.
It's what sex therapists tend to call it.
Like you feel desire and you do something about it. But there's a second primary type of desire, and it's the physiology, it's called receptive desire. And the physiology behind receptive desire, it actually works in the reverse order, which is fascinating, because it's literally the person with receptive desire doesn't feel that surge of desire at the beginning. Literally,
their spouse might,
but they literally don't have that feeling at all. And instead, they have to decide to get sexually engaged with their spouse. And
this is the big, okay, so we're just going to tell on ourselves. So just pause. As you guys know, we are extremely transparent in the Gorman household. And so this was actually one of those myth busters, if you will, for our conversation.
Yeah, it really was.
Because we would have conversations that my desire would be initiated when the act began. It wasn't necessarily a high drive for, and so then there's all those feelings like, what's wrong with me? And then I think, what's wrong with me? And I try to blame it on childhood past, or, delve down this hole, which honestly is just not even the reality of it. Yep. And so this particular myth buster spoke volumes to us. It was kind of like, well, we're not so,
yeah,
not so different. Well, and to tell everybody, just to close that loop for the people who are like, wait, what? So just to close the loop on what receptive desire looks like, when we say that it recurs, in the opposite order, pattern occurs in the opposite order. Once that person with receptive desire decides to get engaged, that's when, assuming that it's positive, like you've got a good-willed marriage and all that kind of stuff, that's when arousal begins.
So their body begins to respond and get
body-
aroused.
Body begins to get aroused, and then desire kicks in.
So their body is aroused before desire even
Isn't
kicks
that
in.
so interesting? And
Yes.
so literally one of the most common questions that we got really early on, we did one of our very first things, we blasted out to our followers and a bunch of other people just to ask if you could ask a sex therapist one question anonymously about, your marriage, something you've always wondered, what would it be? And the top answer by far from like a higher desire spouse was, why isn't my spouse interested?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And because that's what you translate it to. You translate the lack of feeling that surge of desire as they're not interested. And the reality is they are. It is activated completely differently. And
Right.
that helps take away the
Stigma.
emotions of
Right.
it. Something's wrong.
Exactly.
Blah, blah, blah. Now, there is a third, we should probably say this.
Mhm.
There is a third type of desire. Those two by far the majority. But for about 3 to 4% of men and 3 to 4% of women, there's something called resistant desire. And that's like,
Can I give the word picture? And then you can talk
yeah,
a little more about that.
good idea.
So word picture for this whole initiating, receptive, resistant desire. Think of a car. If you have the car turned on and if you put it in drive without putting your foot on the accelerator, the car will move forward
On its own.
on its own.
It's being
just
pulled.
pulled. That is what receptive
Not initiating.
initiating desire is like. It's just being pulled forward
Pulled towards sex.
towards sex. A person with receptive desire, the car is turned on, but it's not in drive, it's in neutral. It can go either way. It's just nothing. There is no movement.
It hasn't been activated.
It hasn't
yet.
been activated.
Something has to activate it. Yeah.
And then resistant desire is the car is turned on and maybe the parking brake is on, or it could be even in reverse.
It's usually the person who, like, for example, maybe there was some trauma in the past, or there's a real issue in the relationship that hasn't been dealt with. Sometimes it's just resistant with no apparent cause.
Good.
But usually what the sex therapists say is that if whatever that is can be dealt with, because usually it can be dealt with, that person is actually initiating or actually receptive,
But
currently
currently,
it's being masked by whatever is going on under the surface.
So back to close the loop.
Yeah.
The Hollywood stereotype of how sex works. What's the percentage of people?
This was so exciting. Like, okay, I'm sorry, we're talking all this whole time. Poor Greg and Julie are trying to get it.
No, you're
This
good.
is
Bring it.
perfect. 'Cause I was going to ask you, what is the statistic for? Yes, please.
Okay, so like if before we had explained this, if you would have guessed what percentage where the man and the woman both have initiating desire, both have that feeling of desire and doing something about it, my guess is that most people would have said that was like 80% of marriages or something.
It's like 100% on the screen.
Because
I say 5%.
yeah, well, believe it or not, depending on how you measure it, it's either 5 or 10%. And what we put 5% in the book, and there's a different way of measuring it that we kind of think is more accurate long term. So we're going to switch to that. It's actually we're going to say 10% of couples, but that means 90% of couples have a different pattern than what you see on the screen.
Which also means that, quite frankly, 90% of couples wonder if they're okay.
Yes, good point.
Are we normal?
Good
Because
point.
we don't fit anything with what we see.
And so that 90% need to know you're the ones who are normal, right? The 10% where both the husband and the wife have initiating desire, they're outliers. Now, if that's you,
hot dog,
go for
we had 10 days ago, we were in San Antonio, and we were saying just that exact same thing. A husband and wife in the audience looked at each other
And
and
high-fived.
high-fived. So hot dog for them. Good on them.
Oh, it was funny. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, that was a long explanation, but
You know what, I think it's good, and while Julie
Yeah.
is, kind of contemplating what she wants to ask next, I would just say that, we often talk about comparison just in general. And in our coaching practice, we've had couples that sometimes would, be struggling in this area, and sometimes might say, well, I have talked to, or I know that, this friend or that friend, they're like, once a month, or, once a week, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter what the frequency is, as an example. And it sets us up for failure 100% of the time if we are comparing
Right.
with TV or anybody else's relationship. Because if you want whatever they have, first of all, we got to be careful that we're not fighting for a limitation, and that what we're fighting for in our marriage relationship and our intimacy and all of these areas is God's best for us.
Right.
I mean, really, that we are even asking ourselves, okay, where am I living limited? And this is something that really over the years has been very
It's
healing.
been a big part of my healing journey because I did come from sexual trauma. And with that, I've constantly asked God, what is your best? Because I don't want to live limited to an idea. I don't know what normal is, because I never was able to experience what normal was. So I had to fight for normal. I had to fight for God's best in our marriage relationship. And one of the questions, and if that's you, a great question that helped me to be able to govern is, God, how do you want me to grow in this area? Where do you want me to have freedom in this area? What is your best for me in this area? And throughout the years, God's helped me to fight for his best and healed what others would say couldn't have been healed.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
One of the things that our co-author has made so abundantly clear to us, he says, people will ask you guys, how often should we be having sex? And he said, under no circumstances answer that question.
Don't ever answer that question.
Don't, because every couple is unique, because every individual is unique. Their situation is unique. It may be dependent on medical issues, age, kids, jobs, all of those things. And then he gives this great example. You want to share what he says?
Sure. I mean, it's actually it's an important point, because he said everybody human, like our human brains, we want someone to tell us what we should be doing, right? Like we want the rule, we want the somebody to take us by the hand and say, this is it. And he said, it doesn't work that way. And especially on this topic, it shouldn't work that way. He said, for example, suppose someone came up to you and said, should I have a pet? Well, I don't know. Like, well, 70% of the people in my neighborhood have a pet. Well, that doesn't mean you should. Like, do you travel all the time, or how old are your kids, or do you have the budget for a pet? Like, and it's that same thing. Like, when it comes to intimacy, like, what are the medical issues? What are the relationship issues? Like, what are the situations with kids at home, and who works a third shift job? And like, there's no one should. But that said, we did spend the entire chapter 2 giving averages.
So share what the average is.
Well, yeah.
Do you guys, do you want to know what I mean? I don't want to take over, like Greg and Julie.
Please.
Okay. Because okay, so here's what we found in terms of people always ask what's normal, right?
And let me actually, one little bit of nerdishness on the surveys. One of the surveys was of 500 married couples. It was a matched pair survey where each husband and wife took it anonymously, but we were able to know and identify that individual 838 was married to individual 837.
Got it.
So we didn't just interview people who were married, but their spouse didn't answer. We we interviewed, surveyed both people in the marriage, which, you know, is
allowed us to get the actual like accurate information.
Exactly.
You bet.
So the thing that to me was so fascinating about like averages of just like if we're just talking about how often do couples actually connect in this way, there's this wide range of normal in terms of like what's going on. And it's basically almost, it's not quite, but it's almost a quarter. Like if you look at it, it's 23% of couples who actually aren't having much, if any, sex at all. Like 9% of couples say never, which,
Wow.
and now those do tend to be older, but
Mhm.
still, right? Like, so 23% are less than once a month or never. And 28% are somewhere between that sort of once a month and once a week kind of thing. So it's 28%.
about 50%.
So about 50% are less
Fewer
than once
than-
a week.
Okay.
Okay. And 50% are more than once a week. So that next, so it's not really a quarter, it's 29%, but still, are basically in that 1 to 2 times a week pattern. And then it's 19% that are 3 times a week all the way up to daily or more. And so it's really, you can tell it's a really wide range. And the average, if you take out the people that aren't actually having sex at all, if you take that group out, the average comes to 1 1/3 times a week. And we always get people come up to us when we do a marriage event. I always have people come up to us afterwards when we say that, and they're like, 1 1/3. Does that mean you stop 1/3 of the way through? Like, what?
That'd be very frustrating, right?
And so it's like, no, 1 1/3 times a week just means 4 times every 3 weeks.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I just have to say, we really had to resist high five in there.
Okay, all right.
Stop. We won't say which category, never mind. Hey, so all of this is really fascinating. And we do work with, when we're doing our reboots, there are times where we'll hear it's been 3 years since we've been
Yeah.
together. And these are younger couples. So, there's a place too that I do believe that this is designed by God. So I'm not trying to put anybody's averages or tell them how many times that they should, but there is a practicality to receiving God's best and receiving what God would have for them and to welcome this area. So I'm just curious, how can couples take your book? By the way, if you don't have a copy of it, you got it?
I got it.
So it is Secrets of Sex and Marriage, 8 Surprises That Make All the Difference. You can get that pretty much wherever books are sold. So your vendor of choice. We do encourage you to pick that up because it's packed and it's done so tastefully, guys.
Yeah.
It's a really great read. It's a great concept and a great.
Well, it's very interesting.
It's very interesting, good story driven. So a lot of times we found ourselves laughing at some of the couples. I love the one couple on the football field and the cops catching.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That,
True story.
True story, right?
Very inspiring.
I could digress, but let me ask the question. How can they use this book practically in their relationship if they're wanting more and wanting greater breakthrough?
So one of the principles for everybody to know, just to sort of level set, is that we found that in general, both husbands and wives, including in relationships where things had gotten kind of tough in this area, both spouses want a better relationship in this area. Statistically, it's unusual to find couples where that's not the case. And so given that most people want to have a great relationship in this area, they may not believe that's possible, but if they could hypothetically think it's possible, they would want it. One of the ways that actually our co-author, the one who's the sex therapist who has worked with
35,000 client hours,
like the way that we designed the book at his suggestion, because of having worked with so many couples, is designed for a couple to be able to read it together. to be able to like, read it out loud even to each other. And we have another joint friend that the Gormans and us know, who said that they've been reading it together, and literally like they'll do it in the evening. They'll do that in the evening as, sort of an evening thing, they're reading something in bed or whatever. And they said sometimes they'll get only through a couple sentences that night, because it's like, really? You think that's not you, is it? Yeah, well, kind of. And it starts a great conversation.
And which is so critical, because what we find, 73% of couples can't talk about this without either awkwardness or just avoidance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you said that. It's a great answer and a practical application, because, Julie and I often read books together. If you're not reading books together, if you, maybe you can't do it every day because your schedule doesn't allow, but or your lifestyle just in general. But even if you can come together once or twice a week at a particular time, I think what's been key for us is to set the time that we're going to do that.
Yep.
And then it's just part of the routine on those days. But for us, it's been one of our favorite things to do. And what we loved about this book, again, was just because of all of the statistical work in there. It's easy for me to say, right? It was able,
Statistics.
it was that we were able to kind of, again, pick through and realize that some of the things that we have struggled with over the years, some of the things that we've found freedom in as we've grown together. It's just, I don't like to say normal, but I think common, really,
Right.
really common, which makes us feel less like that way if something's wrong with us,
100%. I mean, that is one of the reasons why we felt like this book was needed. And
Yes.
and like, for example, and I'll just give you this is a silly example. I'm going to hold something up to the camera, not that you guys can see it, but there's like, you see that? That's an example of like a survey question in the book, where if you're reading through it together, it's like, how would you answer this question?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, because, we're talking about, like, for example, 82% of people felt this way. Well, okay, that means 18% didn't.
Which is
Right?
not an insignificant
That's
number.
not an insignificant number. And so it gives you a chance to really get to know your spouse better. It's really, really helpful for building intimacy, not just physical intimacy, but intimacy and closeness.
Which goes right back to that statistic there. Now I'm getting on my side. Where the communication itself is part of the intimacy that leads to being able to connect in the bedroom too. Sorry, Jeff, you were going to say something.
No, and I was going to say, on those points, the statistics help so much, because, stereotypically we think of men as being what we'd normally call it is the higher drive, the initiator. Well, actually, there is, what is
It
it,
was
24
in 24% of marriages, the wife is the one who has more of the initiating.
And as far as, there is I don't remember what the percentage of men were, but it was around 40% who had receptive desire.
I think,
Wow.
actually, hold on, I have the numbers right here. Yeah, 38% of men. Now, and it does tend to be statistically a little bit men as they get older.
They can switch.
That can sometimes switch.
But the fact of the matter is, for a lot of guys out there,
more than a third,
they're thinking, man, I'm not a real guy. I'm not chasing her around the bed. Something's wrong with me. You're not.
You're just as normal.
Physiologically, you're just wired differently.
Yep.
And that's liberating.
Yep.
So guys, you've written not just books about sexual intimacy. You've written a lot of different marriage books. As we said, we love your approach to doing your writing. What would you say, in an overall general kind of way, what does it take to have a good, healthy, vibrant marriage?
I'm gonna, from one of our earlier research projects, which was the secrets of the happiest couples. And it was a project that several year project in interviewing and then surveying individuals that rated their marriages, self-identified as very happy. We had a very, very
We had a
formal
scientific
process
way of
to identify
that,
those
yeah.
people. But the most critical component for their success was that they believed the best about their spouse's intentions, even when they were legitimately hurt. So here's what that means. I mean, it means what it sounds like, the obvious. But here's something that was absolutely shocking to us when we were talking with Dr. Mike, our co-author, and we were talking about individuals where there doesn't feel like there's this goodwill, believing the best. And he said, well, you have to really kind of identify, is the behavior a result
The
of
hurtful
the
behavior.
hurtful behavior on the part of one spouse? Is it the result of a bad heart or bad skill? And we went, ooh, that's good. Because if it's a bad skill, that can be learned and
Skill can
trained.
be taught.
Okay. So we said, well, then, okay, out of all of your, years, what, like percentages or whatever.
Because we were writing percentages on the board
Right.
of like different kind of categories of marriages.
Yeah. And so Shauti asked, well, then how many, would you say that have come through your office that you would attribute to bad heart?
And he kind of goes, and he thinks about it for a minute, and because he's been doing this for 35 years, right? And he goes, maybe 6.
Wow.
And I kind of went, oh, 6%, that's actually a relatively high number. He's like, no, 6 people
Wow.
in 35 years.
And he sees some of the most desperate people.
Everything. Yes. But most of the time, you've got a husband and a wife who care about each other, and they are trying, but they don't know certain things about their spouse. They've got bad skill. They don't realize it. There's ways they're trying hard in the wrong areas, or they're trying hard and hurting each other. And so that's one of the reasons that we work so hard on the research projects, to dig out the little things that matter, so you can try hard, but in the right areas. And it just,
I love that. One of the, if those that have been around for any time at all, we always talk about seeing the best, believing the best, and speaking the best. And that's what we feel like is a key to happy.
I love that.
Thanks for confirming that.
Well, and I just want to say, let me pull this down just a little bit, even more practical for those maybe who are struggling in their relationship right now. What Jeff and Shauti just shared, that this therapist who's been doing what he's been doing for decades upon decades at this point, worked with thousands and thousands of couples at this point, and is one of the most respected in the entire field. What his experience is saying is that if you're struggling, it's not because your spouse is a jerk, because because they suck, or fill in your own adjective, whatever it is you like, whatever your pet is. It's not that. The likelihood is so minute that that's the actual truth. That the actual truth is that there's a skill difference, and that is all the more reason for us to do marriage maintenance, to read books like Jeff and
Shauti. Chef and Shauti.
I don't know
Shauti.
what the deal is tonight, but anyway, Jeff and Shauti, have written, and also to get a coach, get someone who can help you unravel this stuff a little bit and turn your conversations into productive conversations. Where you can actually get help and grow instead of staying in that same cycle because there's a lack of skill. It's just really something that we need to learn. Let's face it, most of us have not had a great model in what a great relationship actually looks like. Some of us have, but what we're finding is that a lot of people haven't. I think most of y'all would agree.
So guys, we have tons more questions that we could ask, but I'd like to open it up to the community. If you have a question, comment, thought, or just maybe something that you want to ask Jeff and Shauti, this is the opportunity to do that. Raise your hand and we'll give you a shout out.
In the meantime,
I think that one of the things that I've appreciated about the two of you is your authenticity, the way that you've done the research. Would you have any final thoughts again for maybe the person who's dealing with heartache in this particular area? How do they go about getting that healing? What are some ways that they can deal with that heartache?
Mhm.
And maybe find the healing that they've been wanting in this particular area?
Well, there's obviously going to be, as many different answers to the how as there are couples, but there's some principles that I think really will help. And the first sort of that I think, and we've seen for years in all of our research projects, is it is astounding how often so many of the problems that we're facing are based on literally something as tragically stupid as not having good information about like one another or what your spouse is actually thinking, and you're assuming they're thinking this, and instead no, they have goodwill towards you. And so the starting point is recognizing there is so much hope there. I
Yeah.
mean, we have seen, it's been amazing. We've seen over the years people who've literally, their marriage has shaken apart, they've gotten divorced, and then some number of years later, they're like, they find out, wait, that's how you were feeling and I didn't know, and they get remarried and now they're marriage mentors. I mean, like, it's amazing
love it.
how much hope there is. And that hopefully will give people the impetus to say, you know what, we can try. And then if you're going to try, believe the best of your spouse's intentions for you. It's going to be really hard for you to succeed at pulling a hurting marriage back together if you believe the worst of your spouse's intentions, if you believe they don't care, if you believe they said that thing because they knew that it would make you mad, or as opposed to, no, they just didn't realize, or whatever. So that's sort of the starting point. And then if you're dealing with really specific things, the next step is going to look different. If what you're dealing with is general stuff that a lot of people deal with, I'd say read a book like this together. Like, use it as a launching point to learn one another.
And at some level, professional help too.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, if you're dealing with something really specific that goes beyond what a book like this can help you with, let's just say, you read through and you realize, wow, like one of us has been avoiding sex because there's a lot of sexual pain and we've never really talked about it. Well, okay, good. Like, you can still work through other things that probably should be talked about. But then, okay, so get a sexual medicine specialist who can help you figure out how to deal with the sexual pain so that you're not pushing through the pain and making things worse.
Right. And adding to trauma. And as our co-author says, that even in those cases, sometimes you'll need to go through 4 or 5.
The average woman who has sexual pain doesn't know where to go to get help. And so the average person, by the time they get the help, they've often seen 4 to 9 specialists because they went in circles instead of going right to the people who can help. So that's actually one of the reasons why on the website we actually have an article about where to find help for this and several other things.
What is that website?
Yeah.
It's called secretsofsexandmarriage.com. It's just literally the book title, secretsofsexandmarriage.com. And there's several articles about how do you get help for certain things, like if somebody has a pornography issue, if that's the sexual pain, if there's several things that we're going to be adding about, like if you have depression, what happens if somebody has resistant desire, like we're adding that stuff as we go.
Outstanding. So again, the book title and the website, Secrets of Sex and Marriage.
Yeah.
Secrets of Sex and Marriage.com. Again, you can get the book anywhere books are sold. Again, if you don't know how to work the little thing on Zoom that raises the funny little hand, then just give me one of these, you know what I mean, and act all crazy or something, and we'll choose you.
We'll
If
give
you got
you
a
a
question,
call.
if nobody has a question, that's okay. You don't have to. But if you have a question or a comment, we'd love to be able to offer you that opportunity. I want to come back to when we were talking about your response of, you know, what's required, really, what's a great formula for a great marriage, if you will. And you talked about really believing the best about your spouse. And it's funny because we've heard this talked about a fair amount. We talk about it a fair amount, but we've heard other couples talk about it as well in their marriage, and how sometimes we sort of shadow box. In other words, we're thinking that our spouse is thinking something else, or we even twist what they're saying to fit our narrative because
Our
we've got an
narrative.
axe to grind, you know. And so we almost intentionally fight when we do that. And I think shadow boxing is a good way of kind of word picturing that, because we're not even really talking about what we need to be talking about at all. And so we've really learned over the years to practice that in real time, like just given the benefit of the doubt. And if there's anybody on this planet, for crying, I'm not saying it's easy, but if there's anybody on this planet that we should give the benefit of the doubt, even if they make some mistakes, it's our spouse, right?
That's a great way of putting it. It is weird how easy it is for us to give everybody else the benefit of the doubt other than our spouse, who should be the closest person to us, or how easy it is to be kind in our tone to, you know, our close friends, and then speak to our spouse in a way we would never speak to a close friend.
I remember reading a Sports Illustrated story on David Robinson. Remember the center for the San Antonio Spurs back in the 90s, early 2000s? David Robinson, a strong Christian. And in this story, it talked about how the reporter said, you know, he's a very gentle, very kind man. But if you notice, when he sits at the bench during timeouts during a game, he assiduously has his gaze down at the floor. And you think that he's looking at a play that's being drawn up. That's not the case. It's that time that the cheerleaders are out on the floor entertaining, and he doesn't look at them. And if you also watch him, sometimes as women, you know, following NBA stars want to throw themselves at them, they will come up and try to engage him in conversation.
Hand him their number.
All of these things.
Their room key.
He is, as they approach, you would even think that he is, well, he's rude to them. And you're going, but he says he's a Christian, and here he is, you know, why is he acting like this? And he had this great line in the story. He said, look, if any woman's feelings are going to get hurt, it's not going to be my wife's.
Yeah. Wow.
And I
Isn't that a
love
great
that.
comment?
And that is for us as guys. It's what you're saying, Greg. If anyone deserves the benefit of the doubt on this planet, it's our spouse.
Yep.
Yeah, I love
Good
that
job.
story. So we do have a couple of questions and or comments. We're going to go to Grant and Stephanie first up there. And do you have them? There we go. So Grant and Stephanie, hey, it's great to see you guys on tonight. You're regulars. And so what's your question or comment? Whip it on us. Where'd it go? There they go.
You got it.
We just got done with the podcast. Can you hear me through this, or can you hear me?
We
Gotcha.
can hear
Okay.
you. Yes.
Okay. So I'm really excited to read your book. We talk a lot about this with couples and intimacy in general. And on the topic of physical intimacy, my question would be, and again, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, so maybe it's in here. But what percentage or what type of research did you guys find regarding, as couples age, how engaged they are in continuing to prioritize that sexual intimacy and finding different ways to accomplish that? Not trying to be too rash there, but
No,
because as you know, 50% of our married life is at the 50% half
Right.
is over 50 is what I'm trying to say. So, you know, you don't see a lot about that. You know, you don't hear a lot of conversations about that. And I feel like at this stage in life, when you're in an empty nest, that could be some of the most powerful times of intimacy. But I feel like a lot of couples that we talk to kind of start to give up because things start to change. And so there's kind of like, it's not that anything's wrong. So they don't seek therapy. They don't seek any kind of help, but it's just, is this a book that's going to have some research in it that specific, that specific type of percentages or,
Yeah.
you know, kind of walk people through that.
And she's not talking about us, by the way.
See
No.
that you probably can't see that graph very well,
Like a little bit. Yeah.
but
yeah.
that is the percentage of people who are having sex or not having sex by age group. And so you can see that 5% of young couples are not having sex. And then it goes all the way down to, sorry, it was the end, 61% of couples at age 75 or older. But that means 40% still are.
Oh yeah.
And-
Okay. That's
and-
good research. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of,
You're going to tell about the interesting fact in that graph. You notice what you'll see is that there is a tailing off as people age in the frequency, the amount of sexual intimacy that is occurring. So it could be from in their 20s, a little lower in their 30s, a little lower in the 40s, get to 50, and it begins to pops back up. And
Interesting. Wow.
basically the empty nest here.
there's more opportunity.
Okay. That's great
well,
research.
And here's one of the things that we found that is going to require someone like maybe our co-author or other researchers who sort of start with what we've sort of the foundation we've laid and then take it further. But there's more research to be done about especially the older age group of those that are wrestling in this area, because one of the things that we saw very clearly is that there's a lot of people who do what you said, where they kind of back off, even though they don't necessarily need to. Like, yeah, ED becomes a thing. Yeah, menopause creates issues. Like it's different. And a lot of people kind of get kind of cattywampus about like, what does it mean now that, you know, things don't work the same way they did, you know, 20 years ago, and they stop sexually connecting, even though it's actually, for most couples, there's no reason they need to stop sexually connecting. They can do other things.
They have other
There are
appendages,
other
whatever.
that can be done other than, you know.
And that's as far as a Midwesterner like me is going to take this conversation.
Okay.
But that is encouraging. That's very encouraging. And it's a great recommendation for a book to be able to put in somebody's hands that's Christian based, so they don't feel like it's something that they wouldn't want to read. I think that's great. So thank you for answering that.
You
Sure.
bet. Thanks for the question. So listen, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Let's go to Neil and Peg up there. There you go.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, yes.
I just wanted to comment. It was really encouraging or interesting to hear the vast majority of the time, it's just a skill set and not a heart issue. So as a coach, you've got a lot more hope that you can actually help them through some things.
Yeah.
But even as couples, we can always be working on skills in communication or whatever. And so just the notion that it's maybe a skill problem and not a heart problem gives us a lot of grace towards our spouse or
Yeah.
towards the people we're working with.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And
Yeah.
that's true. I never thought about that for a counselor or a coach. That's actually would be really frustrating if, you know, because what do you do about a bad heart, right? Like, but knowing that, no, there's hope in the vast majority of cases makes it easier to keep moving forward as a leader who's trying to help someone.
So good.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. That's and you're right, it is encouraging. So I want to be respectful to Jeff and Shauti and everybody else on the call. But so if we really want to encourage you to pick this little book up. We found it encouraging. We felt it
Especially our marriage
inspiring.
coaches. This is a great resource for the reboot retreat that you guys facilitate. It'll just give you some, maybe some statistics that you wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yep. So again, the title, Secrets of Sex and Marriage. And then first, pick up the book. Secondly, on a different note, Julie and I are going to be leading a retreat. You want to talk to him about that?
Yes, so we are going to be doing an ultimate intimacy
deal?
retreat. I don't know, we're all tongue-tied. If you want to learn about the ultimate intimacy retreat, it's going to be out in St. George, Utah.
Beautiful area.
Beautiful area. We're going to go explore the canyons. If you're available, it's going to be the weekend of the 14th, 15th, and 16th of April. We'd love to invite you. There's only a total of 25 slots, and I think that actually we're down to like just a handful of slots that are available. We promise to treat this very kindly, this topic.
It's going to be a
But
great
we want to
weekend, though.
invite you, yeah, we just wanted to invite you to that. So you can find information about that on marriedforapurpose.com Instagram account. Okay, so go to Instagram, find Married for a Purpose, and we share that. Or be sure to sign up if you're not part of the regular weekly email that we send out. Go to marriedforapurpose.com, go all the way down to the very bottom, and you'll see where there's a subscribe now. We'd like to give you the updates of this call. So the recording, we'll share it. So that way you can watch it. Be sure to share it with your friends, family, clients, for those of you that are our coaches, and point them to this valuable resource. And then also you'll be getting some weekly encouragement from us, and we'll send you some information about that retreat.
So Jeff and Shauti, do you thank you guys first
Yes,
of all.
thank you for your time. Everybody
Really
appreciate
appreciate
that.
Yes, and just taking the time to kind of unpack this a little bit for us. And if people want to learn more just about you and your ministry and what it is that you guys are doing, besides the secrets of sex and marriage.com, where else might they find out more information if they want to connect with y'all?
The easiest way is just to go to our website, which is Shauti.com.
Shauti.com. Now, Shauti was a name that I had to really look at real quick to know how to, spell. So for the other people, like me, I'm not going to call you an idiot like me, but for other people like me, it's SHAUNTI.com, Shauti.com. And you'll find all kinds of good stuff in.
Really
This gal
great
writes some
resources.
incredibly awesome and practical application in blogs, and just love everything that these guys are putting out. Highly encourage you to get in contact with them and stay that way.
All right, with that, we are going to close in prayer and call it a night. So Father, thank you for this time. We honor the gift of sex that you've given. We're asking that you would help us to not live limited in this vital area, but God, that you would give breakthrough. Father, that there would be unity, that there would be connection, and that what you've called holy, we would treat as holy. And we would have communion with our spouse in the way that you intended. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for just your love for us. And thank you for this community of believers. We're asking blessing in every area of their life, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, in Jesus' name. Amen, amen, and amen.
And
Amen.
Bless
right,
y'all.
guys.
Have a great night. And
Thank y'all.
you.